Hi, and thank you for joining me for a short lecture. And friends, today I want to discuss Mesorah. And I understand the word or concept of Mesorah is used in a few different ways nowadays. And the truth is that most religious Jews today use the word Mesorah to describe and justify everything that exists in the religious Jewish world that does not literally appear in Torah or in Halacha. In other words, it is used in a way to justify what there is no source for. Now, Mesorah comes from the word masor, to hand over, sometimes translated as tradition, which is why people think of Tuvia the milkman every time they hear the word, assuming that it encompasses everything that is socially and ethnically accepted as traditionally Jewish today, which, like I said, it does not. Now, yes, the word has definitely adopted many new meanings, but as religious Jews, the question we should ask is how the notion of Mesorah should be understood in a religious authoritative fashion. Now, most non-Jews who study theology are most likely familiar with the word Mesorah and how it's used to describe the Masoretes, or in Hebrew, Baal or Baalei HaMesorah, which were the individuals who were responsible for adding the chapter and verse divisions of the Hebrew Bible, as well as for much of the trope or cantillations used when reciting the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, this form of Mesorah was in no way monolithic, especially by the very fact that there were a few different groups of Masoretes that differed on not just verse and chapter breaks, but on the pronunciation of the Hebrew Aleph Bet itself. For example, we know that the Rambam endorsed the Ben Asher family and the Rav Sadia Gaon endorsed the Ben Naphtali family. So this is just one way where two Mesorot are equally accepted. Not that there was a huge difference, but I find it silly when I see one group bash another group today because they choose to pronounce words differently, which honestly is mostly seen today by Sephardim bashing Ashkenazim, and those with an older Yemenite pronunciation bashing both of them. And don't forget, friends, that even in Nach, it tells us that the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, could not pronounce the shin in Shibolet. And this was actually used to know which Israelite kingdom you descended from. Now, some Hebrew dialects are perhaps more correct than others, but I really don't think, at least today, we're able to know to what extent or really care to the point of making fun of others because of it. And friends, I'm talking about individuals who take pride in their ethnically based understanding of Judaism, which they confuse with the term Mesorah, which I must tell you carries no weight in validating anything if it cannot be proven from either a Torah or halachic source, which is why they wholeheartedly hate and attack groups like mine that has as a goal the de-ethnicizing of Torah Judaism. In other words, we at Dor De'ah understand that different interpretations of not just Torah and or Chazal derive from where the Jews were scattered to, but to then use that as a reason to say that because of their unprovable tradition that one group is any less authentic than another, that, my friends, is just wrong. Or stating that someone cannot on their own understand and interpret Judaism by simply opening up a Gemara or even a code of Jewish law is really a gross abuse of power that they really never had. Now, this only applies if someone has a basic understanding of written Hebrew or Aramaic. In other words, the vast majority of ethnic halachic debates within authoritative Hebrew texts are typically not because of semantics. And if they ever are, it wouldn't be because we don't know the definition of a word today, but rather because there are different understandings of the same word or term depending on what group you belong to. And when those understandings do not have a biblical or Talmudic reference solidifying their meaning, it results in everyone being right and wrong, but still not giving any group the right to point fingers. And there are many, many dictionaries and resources like the Jastro that can help you understand words, both in the Sephardi world and in the Ashkenazi world. And the truth is that they hardly ever disagree. Now, even though I said that having an ethnically based understanding is helpful on certain occasions, there are also occasions that it must be rejected and eliminated when it oversteps its bounds. For example, I've seen many attempt to end a rabbinic argument solely on the basis of an ethnically based understanding, or what they would equate with Mesorah. In other words, they will interpret a certain sugya in the Gemara or in the Mishnah in a certain way, not because of a contextual analysis or not on the basis that they can prove that certain words can mean something different in another context or by a perek or a pasuk in Tanakh, but solely on the basis that this is how he or she learned it from their teacher and their teacher from their teacher, even though it cannot be proven in any way. It's almost equivalent to the Holy Spirit argument Christians make, because he or she could basically always end an argument without proof, without sources, by just stating that the Holy Spirit told me. And who's going to argue with the Holy Spirit? In other words, friends, this is the most idiotic way to pervert the word Mesorah. So, a Masoretic interpretation of any pasuk or any sugya among the Divrei Sofrim, the words of the sages, that cannot be proven or supported anywhere is 100% disposable. And the truth is that if we understand Mesorah in this manner, it would eliminate around 90% of all the arguments that are based on supposed Mesorah. And friends, this is not just a modern day problem. We see this stemming back even to the early days of codification. In other words, no one would say that Jewish law or halakha in itself is monolithic. Now, I'm sure you've heard it. When you open up your Gemara and run to your Rebbe and try to show him a raya or a proof that solidifies your point, and then you hear the common phrase, yeah, but we don't paskin like that. Now, someone not familiar with the way Jewish law works today would say, what does that even mean? Friends, it means that the Talmud or any other work of Jewish law that holds weight in Judaism, whether it's the both Talmuds, Talmud Bavli or Talmud Yerushalmi, the Sefra, the Sefri, the Mechilta, or the Toseftot, are pretty much typically not always clear-cut on what the final law is. In other words, in the Gemara, many times you will hear more than one opinion of a law, and then they'll move on to another topic. And because of this, many times you had different communities that held by different opinions regarding a certain law. Not just in the same tractate, but sometimes on the same page of the Gemara. So, how do you know who's right? Well, in this case, because the Gemara gives no clue, technically every opinion is right. So historically, what typically happened is that a respected elder in the community, known as a posek, then would give a practical conclusion to that law. In other words, stating that this is the practical understanding we, or meaning his community, will hold by. And the people end up absorbing that opinion and tradition into their families and communities, and thus the world of codification is born. But you must understand, because Judaism was never equipped to deal with Judaism without a court or temple, the role of the posek never really developed within authentic Jewish law. In other words, the office only holds as much authority as the community members choose to give it, with the exception of areas like Dine Mamonot and Gittin and other similar laws that allowed individuals to give a ruling without smicha. Now, as you already know, that many who are familiar with Jewish law assume that if a rabbi or a court today paskins on a certain issue today, that this in some way makes it applicable to all of Israel from a Torah perspective. An authority that, I must remind you, only the Sanhedrin had, as it appears in Parashat Shoftim and other parashiot. Like when the Haifa Beit Din paskin that the Rebbe is actually Mashiach, thinking that it could make this stick. Well, unfortunately, to many uneducated religious Jews, it did stick. Because again, only, my friend, the Sanhedrin's rulings carry any weight from a Torah and or rabbinic perspective. And everything else is just opinion. Many times, but not always, disposable opinion. Now, friends, don't think that codification began with the Rif's abridgment of halakha within Talmud Bavli or the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. No, friends, every community had their own oral codification of Jewish law. And the only thing the Rambam, Tosfot, the Tur, the Rosh, and even the Ramah did was put those codes, which in later times became known as those traditions or those Mesorot, into writing. And I know that this is a topic that is a little more difficult to understand than others, so please hear the lecture again if you must. In other words, friends, in Judaism, everything must be provable. If not, we must know why not. And friends, in this game, titles should never blindly be accepted, whether the individual is a Hacham, a Rabbi, a Rebbe, a Mori, etc. For example, if any rabbi brings a practice or idea that does not appear in Tanakh or among Chazal, our sages, those who sat on the Sanhedrin, it must immediately be purged before it adds to what we call Judaism and fall under the direct isur of Baal Tosif, which, yes, in the grand scale also encompasses Torah Shabbat Peh, the sin of adding to the Torah. And what do I mean when I say Judaism? According to Torah, my friends, it's Torah itself and halakha, which is derived from the court's rulings. In other words, your halachot may not resemble mine. That's fine, but they cannot stem from a different source than mine. They must come from the court's decisions, and that court is the Sanhedrin. And the truth is that anyone who decides Jewish law out of baseless traditions when there are clear laws that appear in rabbinic sources is wrong. So ultimately, there are only two different types of understandable Mesorot. Actually, the first type, which I haven't mentioned yet, is actually the only correct understanding of the term. And that's that in the legal sense, the original term was traditionally only ever used regarding the decisions that were passed down from court to court down the generations, again, only during the life of the court. That is what Mesorah actually is. And the second understanding refers to how it was used in a communal setting of community rabbis deciding on a specific practice, either based off of Mishnaic sources and sometimes creating practices out of thin air because of the lack of sources. This practice continues even today. However, from a Torah level, you are not bound to adhere to any of these decisions. But ideally, if you live in a certain community, you should not strive to stand out on laws that do not desecrate Torah. And if you must, find another community or create your own community. Because, friends, it's much better than creating strife in someone else's community. Now, like we said, the most actual halakha has to say regarding this practice is that these decisions are limited to only financial laws, get in Jewish divorce, and other similar type of laws. In other words, those rulings are binding. But this in any way does not give them the authority to create new practices or customs, etc. Again, from a binding perspective, because that would require actual smicha, which I don't have to tell you disappeared long ago. So if there's any purpose behind this lecture is to give you a greater perspective of what you actually believe in. And friends, please do not follow me because of my title or because of my many lectures, but if you're going to follow me or anyone, please do so solely based off of logic and sources, and never because of a tradition that cannot be proven. Friends, for more information on everything Jewish, please visit TorahJudaism.org. Thank you.